Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
It's great to be back.
Today we're tackling something that's been all over the news lately, the whole TikTok ban situation here in the US.
Yeah, it's been impossible to miss.
On the surface, it seems like it's all about national security, right? Data privacy, those concerns about TikTok's connections to the Chinese government.
Right.
But we dug into an interesting piece called Megaopolies and the TikTok controversy. National Security or Corporate Greed by Carrie A. Kidd.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
And it kind of suggests that there might be a little more to this story than meets the eye.
A deeper layer, for sure.
Yeah, so let's jump right in.
Okay.
So, first of all, this term megaopolies, gotta admit, it's new to me.
Yeah, it's not something you hear every day.
Can you kind of break that down for us? What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, think of it this way. It takes the idea of a traditional monopoly and, supersizes it.
Okay.
It's not just about controlling one industry anymore.
Right.
You know, these megaopolies, they're these massive corporations that have their fingers in practically every pie imaginable.
Give us some examples.
I mean, you look at Amazon, right? They started with e-commerce, but now they're into cloud computing, groceries, entertainment, you name it.
It's true, they're everywhere.
And then you've got Microsoft. They dominate software and operating systems, but they're also making moves in gaming, social media with LinkedIn, and cloud services too.
Yeah, they bought GitHub too.
Exactly. And don't forget about Meta.
Facebook, Instagram, the whole shebang.
Exactly. So they're controlling how we connect, communicate, get our news. It's a level of influence that goes way beyond just selling products.
So it's not just that they're big, it's that they're everywhere.
Exactly. They're shaping the whole landscape, setting the rules of the game in a way that can be really hard to challenge.
And now, enter TikTok. So how does this new kid on the block threaten these established megaopolies?
Well, despite being relatively new, TikTok's grown like crazy, right? Especially among younger generations.
For sure, it's all my nieces and nephews use.
And that's a huge problem for companies like Meta, who are seeing their grip on social media, especially with teens and young adults, loosen.
So if TikTok were to suddenly vanish from the US market,
those users, they'd likely flock to other platforms.
Owned by, you guessed it, US-based megaopolies.
Bingo! So suddenly, this whole national security debate starts to look a little different, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little less about protecting data and a little more about protecting market share.
Now, it's important to acknowledge that data security is a valid concern, especially when you're dealing with a company that has ties to a foreign government.
Of course, I'm not saying it's not.
But Kidd's piece makes a pretty compelling argument that there's more at play here.
Well, and she also points out something that honestly is pretty eyebrow-raising.
Oh, yeah.
This whole thing about certain U.S. lawmakers who are pushing really hard for this TikTok ban. Turns out, a bunch of them have some pretty significant financial investments in, guess where?
Let me guess. Companies like Microsoft and Meta. Yeah. Well. It wouldn't be the first time personal gain and politics have gotten a little too cozy, right?
Right. I mean, for example, Kidd specifically mentions Representative Josh Gottheimer. Apparently, he has investments in Microsoft worth somewhere between, get this, $500,001 and $1 million.
That's not pocket change.
Right. And she claims those investments have been doing really well, significantly above average returns.
So suddenly, the push for a TikTok ban seems a little less about national security and a little more about personal financial gain, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and Gottheimer's not alone. Right.
Not at all. Kidd lists a bunch of other lawmakers with similar investments.
Like it.
Nancy Pelosi, for instance, shows up with investments in both Microsoft and Meta.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, each valued between $550,000 and $1.1 million.
Seriously?
John Curtis and Brad Schneider also pop up on the list with ties to these companies.
So it's like a whole network of potential conflicts of interest.
It definitely raises some questions.
So, okay, if these lawmakers were confronted about this, wouldn't they just say they're acting in the best interests of national security?
Of course, they'd probably trot out that argument.
So how does Kidd address that?
Well, she points out that American companies, you know, the Metas and Microsofts of the world,
Right.
they're collecting tons of user data too.
Arguably even more than TikTok.
Potentially, yeah. But they're not facing anywhere near the same level of scrutiny.
Interesting. So it's like this weird double standard.
Yeah, it almost seems like it's less about protecting American users and more about shielding American megaopolies, wouldn't you say?
Okay, so let's say, for argument's sake, that this is all true. How do these megaopolies actually manage to hold on to so much power? Like, what are their tactics?
Oh, they've got a whole playbook. One of their biggest weapons, lobbying.
They spend a ton of money on that.
Oh, billions. I mean, they basically wine and dine politicians, try to influence policy to make sure it favors them. It's how the game's played.
Right, so they're basically shaping the rules in their favor.
Exactly. Amazon's a perfect example. They've been lobbying like crazy to keep their taxes low and avoid any really tough antitrust regulations.
Yeah, they've been pretty successful at it.
Very. Another tactic. Acquisitions.
Buying up the competition.
Exactly. Like, remember when Microsoft bought LinkedIn and GitHub?
Yeah, they're scooping up companies left and right.
It's all about eliminating threats and controlling as much of the market as possible.
Just like they're playing chess, but on a global scale.
It really is.
So, okay, back to this whole national security argument for a second.
Sure.
I get what Kid's saying, but is it really all a smokescreen? Like, shouldn't we be concerned about data falling into the wrong hands?
It's a legitimate question. And look, no one's saying data security isn't important.
Right.
But Kid's point is that maybe we need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
Okay, so what is the bigger picture then?
Well, it's about who controls the data and how that translates into power, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the fear-mongering around a specific app or company. But the reality is, we need a more comprehensive approach to data security, one that holds all companies accountable, not just the ones that happen to be based in a certain country.
So it's less about where the company's from and more about how they handle our data, period.
Right. It's about transparency, it's about accountability, it's about making sure our data is used responsibly, no matter who's collecting it.
So what you're saying is, this TikTok debate might actually be distracting us from the much larger issue of megaopoly power.
It's a shiny object, for sure, but it's important to keep our eyes on the whole game.
Right, and on that note, let's zoom out a bit.
Okay.
This might all sound very abstract, but why should the average person care about this whole megaopoly thing? Like, how does it actually affect our lives?
That's the crucial question, and frankly, Kid doesn't sugarcoat it.
Oh, good.
She talks about the real costs of megaopoly dominance, not just on the economy as a whole, but on individuals.
What do you mean?
Well, for starters, economic inequality.
The rich get richer.
Well, and megaopolies play a huge role in that.
How so?
They concentrate so much wealth at the top, and it can squeeze out smaller businesses, make it harder for people to get ahead.
It's not exactly a level playing field.
Not even close. And Amazon's the poster child for this.
Yeah.
They control like over 40% of the U.S. e-commerce market.
Yeah, we're huge.
Huge. But they pay a way lower tax rate than many smaller businesses.
So the system's rigged in their favor.
Basically, it's a classic example of how megaopolies can use their power to tilt the scales, and it affects all of us.
So it's not just about money, right? Like, what other downsides are we talking about here?
Well, there's the whole issue of labor exploitation.
Like sweatshops and stuff?
Not always that extreme, but yeah, the pressure to keep costs low, maximize profits,
Right.
often means cutting corners when it comes to worker well-being.
Right, like unsafe conditions, unfair wages, no job security.
Exactly. Especially for people in lower-paying jobs, they become disposable.
It's like we're all just cogs in a giant machine.
And here's another thing. Megaopolies can contribute to political polarization.
What? How?
Platforms like Meta, they've got this massive reach, right?
Yeah, billions of users.
And that gives them huge power to amplify certain voices, certain ideas, which can really deepen divides and make it harder to find common ground.
So it's like they're shaping the way we think about the world.
In a way, yeah. And not always for the better.
Okay, so we've got economic inequality, labor exploitation, political polarization.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture.
It's kind of a doom and gloom scenario here.
I mean, there's a reason Kid calls it corporate greed.
Right. So is there any hope? Like, does she offer any solutions to all this? Or are we just doomed?
No, she does. She argues that we need to take a multi-pronged approach, tackling this from all angles.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one, regulatory overhaul.
Basically changing the rules of the game.
Right. We need to update antitrust laws,
Right.
make them relevant to the digital age, address this issue of network effects.
Network effects.
It's this idea that the more users a platform has, the more valuable it becomes, even if their product isn't necessarily the best.
So it's like a snowball effect.
Exactly. The bigger they get, the harder it is to compete, which gives megaopolies this huge advantage.
And how do we fight that?
Well, we need regulations that prevent these companies from using their size and market dominance to stifle competition and harm consumers.
So basically close the loopholes that allow megaopolies to operate with so little accountability.
Exactly. But it's not just about regulations. We also need more transparency in how these companies operate, especially when it comes to lobbying and influencing politicians.
Shining a light on those backroom deals.
Right, and this has to happen on a global scale.
So international cooperation.
Yeah. We need global standards for data privacy and taxation, so megapolies can't just exploit regulatory differences between countries.
It's like a global game of whack-a-mole.
In a way, yeah. But it's crucial, otherwise we'll never level the playing field.
Okay, so that's the big picture stuff. But what about those workers we were talking about? The ones getting squeezed by this system?
Kid talks a lot about that too. She's a big advocate for stronger labor protections, especially for big workers and other vulnerable groups who often don't have the same rights and benefits as traditional employees.
So things like fair wages, safe working conditions, a voice in the workplace.
Exactly. It's about basic human dignity,
So it sounds like there's a lot of work to do.
Oh, tons. But it's not hopeless.
Okay, good. I was getting worried there for a second.
It's important to remember that the TikTok debate is just one tiny piece of a much larger puzzle.
The megaopoly puzzle.
Right, and once you start seeing the connections, you realize it's about much more than just one app or one company.
It's about power and who controls it.
Exactly, and whether we as individuals and as a society are willing to challenge that power.
It's a call to action for all of us.
Absolutely, and that's what we'll be digging into in the next part of our deep dive.
We'll talk about what you, as an individual, can actually do to make a difference.
Because we all have a role to play in this.
So stay tuned for that.
We'll be right back. It's easy to feel kind of powerless in all of this,
Yeah, it's like, what can you do?
Right. These megapolies seem so huge, so entrenched.
Exactly.
But I think Kid's piece does a good job of reminding us that we're not completely helpless.
There's got to be something we can do.
There is, really. I mean, obviously, no one person can single-handedly dismantle these massive corporations.
Right.
But individual actions, when we all start doing them, they can add up and create real pressure for change.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, so where do we even begin?
That's the million-dollar question.
Well, Kid makes a big point about awareness.
Makes sense. You got to know what you're dealing with.
Exactly. We need to understand how these megapolies operate, how their decisions impact us, the whole picture.
So knowledge is power.
In a way, yeah. But then we have to take that knowledge and turn it into action.
Okay, easier said than done, though, right?
True, but we do have a powerful tool at our disposal.
Oh, what's that?
Our consumer choices.
You mean like where we shop and what we buy?
Exactly. Think about it. Every time you buy something, you're essentially casting a vote.
For that company.
Right. You're saying, I support this business, I support their practices.
So we should be more mindful about where our money goes.
It's about putting your money where your mouth is,
I like that. But what about the bigger systemic issues? The laws and regulations that favor these megapolies in the first place?
Well, that's where things get trickier, but not impossible.
Okay, good.
Kid talks about this two-pronged approach:
Lay it on me.
grassroots activism and policy change.
So like protests and lobbying.
Yeah. We need to get organized, make some noise, put pressure on our elected officials to actually represent our interests, not just the interests of these corporations.
Campaign finance reform, antitrust laws, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. It's a long game, for sure, but it's about creating a framework that fosters competition, innovation, and fairness.
So we need to make our voices heard.
Loud and clear, and not just complaining on social media.
What do you mean?
I mean, actually engaging in constructive dialogue, writing to your representatives, supporting organizations working for change, getting involved.
So it's about being informed and engaged citizens.
Exactly. We can't just sit back and expect someone else to fix this.
Right. We all have a role to play.
Okay, so we've talked about consumer choices and activism, but what about just in our daily lives? Like, what can we do personally to, resist the influence of these megapolies? It might sound a little out there, but being mindful of your digital footprint is a big one.
Oh, what?
Your digital footprint. All the data you leave behind online.
Oh, right. Like what websites we visit, what we buy, all that stuff.
Right. And megapolies, they thrive on that data.
Yeah, it's how they target ads and all that.
Exactly. So the more we share, the more power we give them.
So, we should just go off the grid.
Not necessarily. It's about setting boundaries, being more conscious about what you share and choosing to support companies that respect your privacy.
So like using privacy-focused browsers and stuff like that?
It could be as simple as that, yeah. Or choosing to shop at a local store instead of ordering everything on Amazon.
Okay, that makes sense.
Every little bit helps.
But let's be real, it's hard to completely avoid these megapolies.
They're everywhere. But it's about finding that balance, you know?
What do you mean?
I mean, being intentional about how you use technology, making sure it serves you, not the other way around.
That's like setting limits on screen time.
That's a good start. And making sure you're spending time doing things that bring you joy, that connect you to your community, that exist outside of the digital world.
Like reading a book or going for a walk in the park.
Exactly. It's about diversifying your life, you know, not letting these corporations dictate every aspect of your existence.
It's about remembering that we're human beings, not just consumers or data points.
That's a great way to put it. It's about reclaiming our humanity in a world that's increasingly driven by technology and profit.
So, okay, now let's circle back to this TikTok ban. Let's say it actually happens. What are the potential implications, both for TikTok and for the wider tech landscape?
Well, on a practical level, millions of users would lose access to a platform they enjoy.
Especially younger people.
Right. And for a lot of creators, TikTok's become a source of income, so there's a real economic impact there too.
It's like taking away their livelihood.
In a way, yeah. And then there's the whole issue of precedent.
What do you mean?
Well, if the US can ban TikTok based on these kind of vague national security concerns,
Right.
what's to stop them from doing the same thing to other companies down the line?
Especially if those companies threaten the dominance of American megapolises.
It's a slippery slope, for sure. And then there's the impact on free speech.
Oh yeah, good point.
If governments can just arbitrarily ban platforms they don't like,
Right.
it creates a chilling effect on online expression and innovation.
It's like we're trading one form of control for another.
Exactly. And then there are the geopolitical implications.
Like with China.
Yeah, this ban could really escalate tensions between the two countries, which could have a ripple effect on everything from trade to global security.
It's a messy situation.
It is, and it highlights just how interconnected all these issues are.
Right, it's not just about one app, it's about the whole system.
Okay, so we've talked about megapolises, TikTok, data privacy, all these big, complex issues.
And it's a lot to take in.
It is. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, this idea of reclaiming our humanity in a world that's increasingly driven by technology and profit.
It's a big idea.
It is, but I think it's essential.
So what does that look like in practice? Like, how do we actually do that?
Well, a big part of it is recognizing that technology is a tool, not a master.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's about being intentional about how we use it, setting boundaries, and prioritizing human connection and experiences over constant digital engagement.
So things like spending less time on our phones, being more present in the moment, actually talking to people face to face.
Exactly. It's about finding joy and meaning outside of the digital realm, connecting with nature, engaging in creative pursuits, building a sense of community that extends beyond our screens.
So it's about diversifying our lives, not putting all our eggs in the megapoly basket, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it. It's about creating a sense of balance, you know?
Yeah, I like that.
And it's about remembering that we're human beings, not just consumers or data points.
So how do we make that happen? Like,
Yeah.
what are some practical steps we can take?
Well, we'll dive into that in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, good, because I'm ready for some actionable advice.
We'll explore some strategies for reclaiming our time, our attention, and our values in a world that's constantly trying to grab them.
I can't wait. Stay tuned, everyone. Welcome back to our deep dive on megapolises. We've been talking about the power these corporations wield, the TikTok ban, all the ways this affects us.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. And in this final part, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the idea of reclaiming our humanity. Like, how do we even do that in this world that's so driven by technology and profit?
Well, it starts with recognizing that we actually have more power than we think.
Okay, I like that.
It's about making choices, even small ones, that reflect our values, even when the system's pushing us in a different direction.
So like swimming against the current.
In a way, yeah. And one of the biggest things we can do is be more aware of how we're spending our time and attention.
Because right now, they're mostly going to those megapolises.
Exactly. They're designed to keep us hooked, scrolling, shopping, consuming. It's a cycle that benefits them way more than it benefits us.
So we need to break free.
Yeah, step outside that matrix.
Easier said than done, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty attached to my phone. I use Amazon for everything.
I hear you. It's not about going cold turkey. It's about finding balance, setting boundaries, making space for things that actually nourish us.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
Well, one thing you can try is scheduling some tech-free time into your day.
Like put the phone down, close the laptop.
Exactly, even just for an hour. Go for a walk, read a book, have a conversation with someone, anything that gets you out of that digital headspace.
It's like a mini rebellion against the screens.
I like that. Another thing is to be more conscious about the information you're consuming.
You mean all those algorithms and filter bubbles?
Exactly. They're designed to keep us engaged, but often at the expense of critical thinking and a broader perspective.
So we should diversify our information diets.
Exactly. Read different sources, talk to people with different opinions, challenge your own assumptions.
Don't just stay in that echo chamber.
Right. It's good for your brain, and it's good for democracy.
Speaking of which, getting involved in the political process is huge, right?
Absolutely. Megapolies have a ton of influence over our political system.
Yeah, lobbying, campaign donations, all that.
But we as citizens have power too. We can vote, we can contact our representatives, we can advocate for policies that benefit people, not just corporations.
Without taking ownership of our democracy.
Exactly. And it's not just about national politics. Get involved locally, support community initiatives, make a difference where you live.
So it's about recognizing that we have a voice and using it.
And it's about finding strength in numbers.
What do you mean?
I mean, you're not alone in this. There are so many people and organizations out there fighting for a better world.
So connect with those movements. Find your tribe.
Exactly. It makes a huge difference to know you're not in this alone.
Because it can feel really overwhelming sometimes.
It can, and it's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to get frustrated, to feel like giving up sometimes.
What matters is that we keep going.
Exactly. Keep coming back to your values, keep reconnecting with your purpose, and keep taking action even if it feels small.
It's about progress, not perfection.
So well said.
And I think that's a great note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, from TikTok to Megapolies to reclaiming our humanity.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. And to everyone listening, thank you for being here. Keep asking questions, keep challenging assumptions, and keep fighting for a better future.
Because remember, the future's not predetermined. It's up to us to create the world we want to live in.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.